All right. So I'm going to say one, you repeat one. I think since I pause it and restart it, I think it syncs up automatically, but we'll just in case.
Okay.
Okay. So, so I'll say one, you repeat one. Okay. One,
1,
two,
2,
three,
3,
four.
4.
Okay. So I'll just say, then now I'm going to say one, two, three. Then I'll just say, hello, Dan.
Okay.
Okay. Ready? One, two, three. Hello, Dan.
Hi, Jeff.
Well, you guys are rocking it with the Planar Compass 3.
Yes.
Rocking it. What, 10? You're
Thank
at
you.
10 grand. I didn't check it. You're like 9 something earlier today, I think.
Yeah, I think we just went over 10 a little bit ago.
Yeah, that's quite an achievement for our hobby to hit those kinds of numbers. And I think I don't say what tipped me off was you had your whatever they call that landing page like 2 or 3 weeks before it started, and my goodness, it's like you're organized. Like, and I'm looking
Yeah.
at my life, I'm like, I'm in shambles.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where we've been working on this for a long time.
Well,
And
it
that's the
shows.
advantage of a series. Like when you're working on a series, you kind of know like 3 is next. When you're doing
Yeah.
random things, that's a little different,
Yeah, but still, I mean, there's quite a bit in Planar Compass too.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure content wise how it's going to compare. 3 will compare to 2.
I'm hoping it to be a little bit smaller. I felt that 3 was a little over the top, but it was one of those things where we had a lot of trouble pruning. And then I felt like, if we can make it saddle stitch, if we pull it off, I'm okay with it, because I really dislike perfect binding.
Yeah.
It's okay for player reference stuff, but for something for a referee, nobody wants to deal with that when they're trying to GM and they're trying to keep the book open. So I'm really adamant about either perfect binding or whatever proper book binding is. I don't know what it's called, but when it has like thread binding, if we were to go up to like a hardbound book,
Oh,
that's the kind
right.
of thing I would want.
Yeah, because they'll take like a group of like, I don't know, like 4 sheets of paper or 8 sheets of paper or whatever it is, folded in half,
Yeah,
and those are stitched, and they stitch all those together somehow or glue it together. But
exactly.
yeah.
Similar. It works very similar. I feel like the end effect is very similar to saddle stitch, where and it's weird because when you come into this, I feel like you would assume that saddle stitch is cheaper.
Yeah.
Because it's to an outsider, it seems like it's like I don't know, like the more crude method, but I find it to be much nicer than perfect bound, personally. But it's all taste.
Well, I think there's a couple things going on. I mean, I think there's some downsides to it, but I think the upsides is that it's more robust. You don't have the breakage like you do with perfect bound.
Yeah.
And I think the perfect bound, you're kind of losing out on your margins
Yep.
in the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the commitment, was we wanted to keep it saddle stitch. We squeezed it in. We went down. It ended up being the same paperweight as 1. It turns out I didn't realize that, because when I was playing around with it, Mixam has changed their default now. They went up from 70 to 80 as the default. So this whole time I was hemming and hawing about having to go down in paperweight, and then I went back and looked and I said, oh, we did 70 for the first one, so that's fine. And then when I got it, I was like, oh, 70 is perfectly thick for something of this nature. So I wasn't as worried about, but I was worried about making it too thin in order to make it bindable.
Well,
These
I
are things that
do.
people like us worry about.
Well, because we don't know, right? It's kind of
Right.
like you buy a computer. It's like, do I need that extra whatever core? Do I need the
Mhm.
extra so much of video? Or like, I don't know. And you hate to go in and say, if I just would have spent another $150, my computer would have been perfect.
Yeah.
But and again, you may be overspending by $300 because it's got features will never use. So it's
Right.
hard to know for those of us that aren't like, involved.
Hmm.
Because I'm in a situation where I just with complete abandon just said, you know what, fan of the fly guy, I'm just going to take it wherever it goes. And then once the page count started racking up, I'm like, that was not a good idea because now I'm in a situation.
What are you up to?
100 pages.
All right. So that's a book now.
Well, I think I can do it. I think
Yeah.
I found some people that can do it. I just don't know. And this is where it's definitely not mix them. I mean, the option was to either try and make this work. So because I never do anything straightforward and everything's just is a mess, so I guess I'll just go ahead and go down this route. So I did find a printer who could print like 130, whatever, 32 pages,
Really?
but it had to be 8.5 by 11.
Okay.
Then I found another printer. They can print more pages, but they're not limited to 8.5 by 11.
Okay.
And then,
I'd be-
or I'm sorry, yeah, because it folded in half.
I'm just trying to imagine it closing because already ours like is difficult to close. I can't even imagine what 100-page.
Well,
That
I
also
imagine it's
looks
going to be
like-
like a fan fold, and it's just going to stand on the table like a cylinder.
That's a whole new presentation type you could lean into.
Yeah, it just
You
shoots
know?
out of the package when they open it, just poof, you know.
Uh,
So
that's interesting.
so I did
Well,
find it.
if you pull it off, let me know. I'm curious.
Well, the reason I tricked me off is was talking to Trevor, and he's like, yeah, those old wherever their Earl Otis ones were higher page count than
Mhm.
then I gave him a call and had him start taking measurements on it. And then he said, well, the page count's actually less. But anyhow, I found another printer in Ann Arbor, Michigan, who I think they might be able to do me right. We'll see. But I think I may go comic book size. So then it's like, because 8.5 by 11 is too big. 8.5 by 5.5 is too small because I want more room.
Mhm.
I thought if I would go to comic book size, which is something goofy, like 6 5/8 by 10 and 8, I can't remember. I thought, well, that will give me more room and I'll take less pages. But then once I started to look at the layouts, like kind of like having those extra margins. So
Yeah. It's hard. It's one of those things like I've grown to really like margins. I feel like when I started off, I was informed by the OSR sensibility before this, which was like use every centimeter, every millimeter of the page. And
Yeah.
you'd see the OSR stuff from like the early 2010s where it would be like there would literally be like the lowest margin they could put.
Right.
But it ends up becoming difficult for the eye to parse. I think I've really been a convert to white space in the last 2 years now that I'm engaged in it, you know.
Well, I mean, truly, this stuff is all fan stuff. And I think we as fans are becoming more educated, but early on, I mean, we didn't
Right.
know.
Yeah, there was very few people back then, I think, that had any sort of publishing background. And now I think there's a lot more people who are in publishing or publishing adjacent, and they're informing the scene both literally and also by example. And so that's why I think there's been a real transformation in the last 5 years in terms of sensibilities and quality, you know.
Yeah, and I think even with stuff like Affinity Designer now, it's more affordable. You have to put the time in to learn it, but it's
Yeah.
definitely the bar gets lowered for being able to produce something that's high quality.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's pretty astounding. So I think when this drops be Saturday, I think you'll have another day or two. Is it on Monday you're ending?
I think Tuesday morning it
Tuesday.
ends.
Oh, okay.
I think I can never figure it out because I set the day. I don't do the date. I do number of days.
Oh,
And then I think Kickstarter tells you the date. I don't really pay attention. Honestly, once I get it, once it starts, I'm like so done by the time I get to that point that I almost don't even pay attention anymore. I mean, obviously I go through the emotional roller coaster that we all do.
yeah.
Because right now we're in the plateau, and even when you're successful, even when you're very, like, I would consider us by zine qualities to be very successful, the plateau still sucks. Like, it's like,
Oh, yeah.
we still have stuff we want to do. There's people we want to add to the team, and it's still up in the air when you're in the plateau. I have to be sensitive to the fact that there's other people who aren't even funded, and so it's kind of a shitty thing to complain about on my behalf, but I still
Yeah.
feel it,
Well, but what I'll say too is, as you start adding team members,
Mhm.
Those higher numbers, even if you look like $10,000, like you guys are just going to have cash. You're
Right.
going to go to the bank. But when it all said and done, when you start paying for all the shipping, the
Mhm.
printing, and the people, the editing, because you did, and the art, because you're funding art, use this to fund art.
Yeah.
It's not a, yeah, you're not, why should I
Yeah.
let you quit your job to do this?
Nope. Yeah, especially when shipping's a part of the calculus, because then now, especially with the rise in shipping, and that brings international shipping, which is almost a whole different discussion, but that really inflates the numbers tremendously, even if it's just media mail, because media mail over 200 people adds up. That's $500, and if it's even bigger, if it's an even larger number of people, it's more than that. And once you get international, 20, 30, $40,
Yeah,
multiple of that adds up, and Kickstarter just counts that as the total. So people see
exactly.
that and they think, oh, you got 10 grand in the bank. Nah, almost 1,000 of that, if not more, is shipping. That's gone. Printing costs gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kickstarter fees gone. Sales tax. People don't know going in. If this is your first one, you gotta account for sales tax. There's very few states in the US that don't collect sales tax. And you still owe it, even if you're not a store or have no background in sales. They don't care.
Right.
You owe it. So yeah, it ends up, I think last year we had something like 14,000 for the Kickstarter, and I think we ended up with like 1,000 left over once it was all done. Paid everyone, printed, shipped, reshipped the stuff that was lost. Part of it was like shipping went up last year between the Kickstarter and fulfillment, and international shipping in particular. So that really ate into things. But that's
So you're still doing international then?
Sorry?
You're still doing international?
We offered it, and I kind of offered it in the expectation that nobody would take it, and people still are, but it's definitely different than last year. We still have people complaining, like people still don't believe us. And I want to be like, I have to be diplomatic because I'm representing 7 other people in this project.
Right.
So I can't just, if it was just me, I'd be very punk rock and give them the middle finger, but I can't do that. That's not right. But if it was just me, I would just drop shipping calculators and the weight and say, figure it out and tell me if I'm wrong, because this is my 3rd time doing it. I don't think I'm wrong. And I'm working with a fulfillment person. I don't think we're both wrong, but hey, maybe we're missing something. Maybe shipping to China is actually $4 and I didn't know.
Yeah, maybe. Well,
Yeah.
what I don't find that unbelievable. I find shipping to Canada unbelievable. That's what I find.
Oh, it's killing us. And it's killing us right now too, because we're not even in a Canadian store right now. And we've always had a relationship with Canadian stores, but they can't even afford to buy our zines. Now we have pricey zines. I'll say that up front. We charge in the higher end for our zines because they're full color and they're big, and we put a lot of time and energy into them. But once you factor in shipping and currency conversions, I've had 2 stores tell me we can't afford to stock it. Like we can't, the math is impossible. And I
Yeah,
can't blame them. I can't get mad at that. That's fair.
I think normally, what I understand as far as distribution for RPGs, I think the company who publishes gets 40, the distributor gets 20, and the
Right.
store gets 40. So once you start cutting into, when they put stuff on sale,
Yep.
it's that 40% that's they're getting cut into very significantly. So same thing here.
Yeah, it becomes almost a guaranteed loss for them unless they're selling it exactly at MSRP or higher. And that's hard to do a lot of times. So, I mean, it just stinks. I've been talking to people about this a lot. Like if I had more time and energy, I would honestly try and set up like some kind of distribution co-op, at least for Canada, but certainly I think for the UK and the EU mainland, it would be so great if there was like 3 or 4 people or businesses that would be like, yeah, we'll receive the product, we'll distribute it. Mixum UK exists, so that covers UK. Mixum Canada exists, so that covers Canada. In fact, half of our stuff comes from Canada in the first place. So if I just had someone to receive it in Canada, that would solve the problem. But the problem is that 99% of us are operating out of our homes or our apartments or whatever. So even if you're running a store, you're carrying 5 to 10 copies of a zine most of the time. There's very few stores that are like Exalted Funeral that have true inventories with a warehouse. Most of them are people operating and they've got a shelf and they've got 5 copies of this zine, 10 copies of this zine, and they can't afford, they don't have the space to do fulfillment for other people. Some of them do out of the kindness of their hearts, but it's not like, it's feasible, I think. But if we could find a way to coordinate that and cover different parts of the globe, that would be, I think, a tremendous help. But I think it would also be a logistical, I don't want to say a nightmare, but definitely a conundrum to solve how that would all work.
So for foreign, by foreign, I mean anything not in the US, like what's the breakdown for your sales for your Kickstarter? Is like, to me, what I find, for instance, when I look at my podcast,
yeah,
the numbers are, obviously the US next highest is the UK, but Canada's like really low. So I just kind of curious how the percentages break down for international. Like where is your largest international group?
I would say in the past it was probably Canada. We used to have a lot of support out of Canada, and I don't think it's that we're suddenly unpopular with Canadians. I just think that the metrics have changed a lot in the last year, a lot. And I don't blame anybody. Like I don't want to pay $15 to $20 of shipping on a $15 to $18 zine. That makes no sense. I wouldn't,
because we're Americans, the United States, right? Everybody else in the world is used to this. We're like, no way.
That could be a part of it. But I do have people who come at me and say, like, why is this so much higher than last year? And I'm like, well, with this and this. I mean, the worst one was from the first year to the second year, because the first year we didn't know what we were doing, and we were just lucky that we didn't have a tremendous number of backers. Like we hit the right amount that it was successful, but we didn't get hosed on shipping. But we probably would have gotten hosed because I didn't know what I was doing at all. I was doing fulfillment myself, so I didn't know what packaging materials to get. I didn't know what rate of shipping to buy or anything, and when you've never done anything like that before, and it's like you're trying to figure all this out in a short period of time, 2 weeks to 4 weeks, right? Because I feel like that's the way it is with a lot of people when their first zine quest or zine month or whatever is like, you're probably not thinking about it 6 months in advance. You probably find out about it right before it starts or when it starts, and you already have maybe something, and you're trying to get it all together, right?
It is.
It's hard to figure out shipping when in those circumstances.
And I think I got turned on to Pirate Ship,
Mhm.
which
That's
has
what we
helped.
use.
Yeah,
It's great. And they
it's
have
actually quite
fantastic
amazing.
customer service too. If you ever, something goes wrong, they have the best customer service.
What did you have go wrong?
We had a shipment to the UK that was like, I don't know what happened, but it looked as if the box had been opened. Much of the packing material disappeared, and then it had been resealed again. And in the process, the zines were just damaged beyond the
Oh,
point that the store was willing to sell them. And I was like, that's fair. I mean, I
right.
don't expect you to sell like damaged zines even at a discount, because nobody who wants to buy, you know, half price zines that have defects when they're already like kind of entry level RPG things to begin with. But Pirate Ship was awesome because you didn't, even though it was UPS, I didn't deal with UPS. I dealt with Pirate Ship, and they took care of everything. I just sent up the pictures and the tracking number, and they just took care of it. And they gave us a credit, which we continue to use them, so the credit works for us. Like, that's fine.
Yeah,
So,
it's really pretty astounding. I mean, I've never, the only stuff I've done has been locally, but as far as I wish Kickstarter, the implementation was better. I wish they could export things. I think they do a USPS
yeah.
dump. I haven't tried.
Uh,
Did they try that? I can't remember. It worked fine. I think I ended up having to play around on a spreadsheet to get it to work right, but once I did, it wasn't too bad.
I've heard that you can go directly from Kickstarter into Pirate Ship. I haven't done it because we've been using Spearwitch for fulfillment. So I have no idea if that's what he does or if he has to do some middle work, but I've heard people do that. So that might be possible.
Well, I know that was, if I recall correctly, that was on the survey from Kickstarter was, hey, what options and things would you like to see? Do you
Mhm.
remember? Did you get that survey?
No, if I did, I didn't pay attention.
Oh, well, yeah, exactly. Well, it's just apparently if you're too successful, they don't bother giving you a survey. So,
Could be. Or
so
I've said
anyway,
enough nasty things about them that they're not interested in what I have to
yeah,
say.
exactly. They check hash.
On the verge of getting blacklisted.
But no, they put a survey for things you'd like, people would like to see, and so you can rate it. So that was one of the things, I think, if I recall correctly, was something along those lines. Maybe not. Yeah, I've slept since then.
It'd be interesting to see if they actually implement any suggestions, because they don't seem to change. Like, I feel like the interface hasn't changed in the 2 years that I've been doing it. And I was just
What?
saying to Sarah on launch day, it was like, this page editor pisses me off. And this is only our third time. I can't imagine if this is someone's 10th time and the
Yes.
interface hasn't changed, like how mad I would be.
Well, at least they made the button more obvious to launch before. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah. The amount of times I've seen someone say I accidentally launched and I just like, oh my God.
yeah. They had to hear about this thing hundreds of times. It's like, that's one of the easiest things to fix. Even if they were to put a bright red color on it or arrow, something on text to tell you, like, don't touch this because this is the launch button.
Yeah. It's wild.
So you guys you've got the countdown. So you have you had stretch goals and you're slowly ticking away through those. Yeah, that's another one I need to get Zach Goins to talk about. The idea is that he talks about using the stretch goals for creating a narrative ride and it's like, it's kind of like, that takes a lot of thought.
Yeah, I don't have the bandwidth for that, honestly. Like, I'm just not a natural hype man to begin with. So I don't like a lot of aspects of Kickstarter. It's just the only way I've seen so far that I can pay artists and people a fair price for their labor. Like, if I raise $300, how am I going to pay somebody? You know what I mean? And then,
Right.
like, that's what it looks like outside of there. It's obviously, it's changing a lot and people are doing the hard work that we haven't done yet. Like we tried to do itch funding this past spring and it didn't really go great. But I don't think that's necessarily an indictment of itch, as to say is that Kickstarter does a lot of work for you. And that's why people like me and you and others can come in on their first time and be successful.
Right.
Just because Kickstarter is going to get you eyeballs that other websites just aren't. That's not necessarily a justification for Kickstarter's existence. It's just a reality. But I don't like aspects of Kickstarter. I don't really like the stretch goals. The reason we do the stretch goals is so that it's not all or nothing. I know the point of Kickstarter is to be all or nothing, but I feel like with a zine, 50% original art is better than no zine at all. So I'd rather just pay someone a fair wage and do 50% of the art original and then fill it in with public domain or something. That's why we do the stretch goals. All of our stretch goals are just our actual, like almost the content modular. And I know people dislike that because they feel like the actual content shouldn't be stretch goals, but it's the only way I feel comfortable doing it because I'm afraid to put up like a $15,000 budget for a zine. But that's actually, if you have an 8-person team, that's what it costs. Like that's what it is. I know it's just a zine, and I guess we should scale back our expectations, but this is what we want to do. This year we have something that's truly like not actually required for the zine, which is we have Loot the Body doing an album. But so that's a true stretch goal in like the spirit of what a stretch goal is.
Yeah, no,
So the rest of it is just content, and I mean we use it to try and build hype, but we don't use it in the same way that people kind of use it to make it more exciting or more enticing. Like I don't think most people are like, oh yeah, it's getting an editor now I'm getting it. Like
yeah.
You know what I mean?
I saw the editor. I was like, does that mean it doesn't get edited? But I know it does. You're just saying we're just going to hire a person to now do a layer of editing.
Yeah, exactly. In many ways we treat the stretch goals the way people actually do itch funding, which is that you have series of goals. Like our initial goal is just the first of a series of goals. That's the way it has worked for us, and so far it's working for us on this one. So
I think what I'm going to do with my next one, I don't know if I am, but I think I need about 3. I probably need make it be about maybe 3,500 to break even.
Mm-hmm.
I need to redo the math. So I may do is just set the funding at, I think like you guys set yours at 600, I believe your minimum. I might set mine pretty low. So really, if it were to fund, yours was to fund at 600, you lost money, right?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, we've already lost money because like we pay for the cover out of pocket. We pay for other things out of pocket. We always pay for the writing up front because I feel like writers shouldn't. The writing's necessary. The writing is the necessary thing. The art is necessary, but you can function with a zine without the art. The writing
there's
no zine without the writing. So I feel like the writers should be paid before the Kickstarter, is my point of view. It's just Sarah and I don't get paid because we're Planar Compass, so we're the last ones to get paid. But so I mean it's, if we were to do 600, I don't know that we would lose money. It would just be a far more scaled back zine aesthetically, because really that's what all that funding is. Almost most of it is aesthetics. It's art and layout. So this would be more.
Do you pay for proof copies, or do you just go to, once it's, or do you just soft proof it?
We do it different every time. So the first one, there was no editor. So I just laid it out myself, and then we put out several beta versions to the backers, which I no longer do because it didn't garner any kind of reaction. So I don't know if people liked it or didn't like it or what. I've now that I've been in it longer and I've backed more things, I find that personally, and I think this is the case with a lot of people, and this is why it got the reaction it did, is that it's all noise until the final product is in your hands.
Right.
So I think people just aren't interested in unfinished versions. I think the small amount of people are, but most people are just going to wait until you say, this is it. This is the final version.
No, but I mean, like as far as proof copies, like, do you, when you, do you order
print?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a physical copy in hand to check for mistakes, or do you rely on because if you do, right there is $70 or better with that run. So
usually the proof copy is more about if it works in print, then we're usually not looking for proof editing at that point. Hopefully. I mean, the first one went to backers with a ton of errors because we edited it ourselves, and you can't do that.
No.
I think the second one did a lot better because we edited it, and then Jared did the copy edit, and then it went to layout, and then we looked it over again as a team, and then Jared did a proof edit. So it went through a lot more than the first one did. So hopefully by the time we're ordering proofs, that's more about, is the layout working with the printing? What's it look like when it's
right? I'm just saying right there, $70, you know, with or more with shipping, you know,
especially if you're weighing options like this one. We got it printed because it was so big. We got printed in different ways. So we got a perfect bound version, and we got a saddle stitch version, and we got different page coatings. Just because we were like, if we're gonna, at this point with this amount of money, it better be the exact version we want.
So you're already now a couple $100 in just with that.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm just saying that $600, it's not too far off to, I mean, it eats up quick. So
yeah.
I was thinking about doing, because if I get less than say 3,200 or 3,500, I will technically lose money. And I thought about for the stretch goals would be now I get paid back for having paid the artist. Now I get paid back because I'm going to pay everybody up front. Like, and then at the like $4,000 goal, it's like, hey, I broke even.
Yeah. I think that's a valid. I've always thought about putting up a final stretch goal that says Dan and Sarah get paid. Because we've yet to actually take $1 out of this thing in 2 years. Which, I mean, I think we're middle of the road successful. So I think that if you're, I'm not trying to discourage people, but I want you all, if you're listening, to weigh your expectations going into this. This is not a side gig, which is going to pay dividends in the first couple of years, unless you can afford to do it full time right up front. But if you're doing this part time, you should expect, I think, a couple years where you're getting beer money at best.
There are people who know how to do it right, like Tom Wilson. He kind of has it dialed in.
Mm-hmm.
He's the only person. He uses stock art, and he doesn't go for, and he does, I think, POD from drive-through.
Yeah.
And so he actually, if you look at percentages, he actually does fairly well, as far as me looking on the outside. But
I think that's the problem, is that because of what we produce, the margins are very thin. Even, no matter how much we mark it up, it just is like if you do 60 pages of full color, even just printing 60 pages of full color is more expensive than 40 pages of black and white. It's stuff like that, and it adds up at scale. So, and I'm not like, it's all good to me, because to me this is just like a high stakes hobby. Some people have woodworking, and some people have rifle shooting, and I make zines. I would like to maybe turn it into something more someday, but it's not in the cards at the moment. But like I said, yeah, I think as you said, if you can do it from a calculated business way, and I don't want to say that as a slight, because it's not. I think you can be very creative with heavy constraints. But if you're willing to adopt those constraints, absolutely. Yeah, I think you can do it. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are, there's not a ton of money on drive through, but if they do well on drive through and they've got other things going on, so they've diversified the income stream, so to speak. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Kickstarter, because if Kickstarter really does kind of lose the RPG community or become taboo in the RPG community, I mean, Kickstarter is such a huge part of people's income in this, in the indie field, at least. And I would say probably other than Hasbro in the mainstream field, Hasbro is probably the only company that doesn't need Kickstarter whatsoever.
Right.
Everyone else is using Kickstarter to massively pad the numbers. I think Charlie Ferguson, who runs Ian Newsom, did a really brave, I think, transparency blog post where he broke down all of his numbers.
Oh yeah.
And something like, at least, I can't remember the numbers, but Kickstarter was at least a quarter of the pie, at least. So imagining a quarter of your money disappearing, that's hard, but I think it's a lesson again in diversifying. Like so many of us, we are reliant on a single printer and a single crowdfunding source or whatever. And if you've got one thing that's a part of your model and you need that thing, you're in a lot of trouble.
Right.
You really are,
Right, because I mean, you even think about things like shipping and things like that costs or paper costs or whatever. It's like, I think we're pretty fortunate at this moment. It seems like costs are going up, and it does, I think, appear, I don't know, that customers are willing to pay more at this point. But
I think to an extent, yeah, definitely. I think the other shoe is gonna drop with inflation, unfortunately, because if groceries go up 30%, are people going to buy $10 zines? I don't know.
Yeah, I think 7% for 2021.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think people are totally. I think obviously working class people are feeling that immediately, but I don't think middle class people are totally feeling that yet. So I feel like that shoe's going to drop in the next year. So and again, it's like, how do we adapt to that? Do we go all digital? Do we offer print and just try and do it in a safer way? Like I know a lot of people do this. They'll do a big old print run and hope they sell it. I don't do that. I sell it to the stores first. And it's not great because they have to wait around for it, but I'm not ordering copies that I know are going to sit around. Like I did this time because I could kind of look at like what happened with the first issue. And so we're still sitting on some copies, but it's not like when people, and this is not quite a thing in zines, it's more like a book thing, but it's not like when people mortgage a house and then they have a garage full of G books, I think now more than ever, people really need to gauge their print runs and stuff like that, because it does add up. Even a $300 print run matters. Yeah,
and I think the thing is, I mean, for me, it's like if Kickstarters are something you plan to keep doing, then I think having extra copies can pay off if people are willing to buy those. But you got to be, but if you're not going to keep doing the Kickstarters, you're going to run the same situation where you have inventory, and the inventory may be all your profits. You have to sell those off before you actually make money sometimes.
Yep.
that's kind of where I'm at with Journey to the Madlands. I've got about 30 copies. So once I sell all those, I'll do okay. That's all the profit I got is in physical copies at the moment,
Mhm.
which is fine. I didn't lose any money,
Yeah,
but but that's the whole thing. Cause once you do your print run, it's like, it's fairly cheap. Each additional copy is cheaper,
that's the temptation. Yes,
but yeah, it's like,
it's the temptation. Yes.
but you're taking out all the margins that you just made to do that. It's a gamble. And so
Mhm.
yeah, it's not easy.
No.
And I think that's just it. I think if you're going to keep, I think for you, it's got to be more of an incentive to do overruns just because you're planning on a series of the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah. And it becomes, I think, I mean, this is only our third one, but I think it becomes more desirable the more there are of something, you know. I know, like, it's like kind of like when a TV show has 4 seasons, it's a little bit more interesting to get into sometimes than something that's like half a season. Even
Is there
though
a point
the
where,
shorter thing might be easier to get through.
yeah, but what if it's 8 seasons? Do you say, well, do I even want
Yeah,
to do that?
better be good.
Yeah,
If it's 8 seasons and I don't like the first 4 episodes, I'm probably dropping it.
well, but the thing is, sometimes you think, well, do I want to invest 8 episodes? Like I've never watched The Blacklist until recently, and it's like 8 seasons, and so we ended up watching it. It was good, but but my wife also binge watches, so she gets hooked. She can go. I don't want to say out of control, but she can kind of go out of control. So if
Yeah,
you know,
I'm
watching
a
all the
binge
Downton
watcher.
Abbeys or whatever it may be is
Right. Yeah, I'm definitely a binge watcher for sure. I'm like a binge consumer of anything. So if I find a book I like, I'll probably sit until I finish it if I can. That's just
wow.
my nature. I tend to get immersed. I don't get in things. Um, that's how I function.
Yeah, and it's good as long as you know when you can do it and when you can't do it. So my wife's been watching these K dramas. Have you seen any of the K dramas?
No.
So Netflix has a bunch of these. So it's South Korea puts out these shows,
Okay.
and they're actually, I think in general, I'm just gonna make a general blanket statement. I think their shows are probably in a lot of ways better than the US shows,
Mhm.
and they do things from a different angle. But anyway, they're generally 16 shows to a season.
Mhm.
So my wife's like, oh, we're at the last, I'm just going to stay up and watch the last episode or two. I'll go to bed. And then found out there wasn't 16 episodes in the season. This one had 18. It's just
Oh.
like 1 in the morning, she's sliding to bed, like, I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah,
Okay.
I just it'd be interesting to know, if this I think whenever we're involved in something that's kind of going big, we don't know if it's sustainable or is this
Mhm.
a bubble.
Yeah.
The whole zine thing seems like it's a very healthy thing that will go on forever, but it's hard to know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's certainly been a this year. I think is going to be a test. I would say that although I think Zemo is way better than ZineQuest in a lot of ways, it's definitely been smaller financially. I think. I think I don't remember what the number was total dollars for last year, but it was something like $1 million or whatever. And I just don't. I mean, I haven't sat down and done the math, but I don't think the numbers are there. And that's not necessarily a horrible thing, but maybe that's the recalibration we need in order to change with what's coming economically, in terms of cost of printing and shipping and people's expendable cash. Maybe we've been living in a bubble and need to get a little bit of cold water. But I think it's a couple things. It's the shift away from Kickstarter. Kickstarter not supporting us in this time whatsoever, and the fragmentization
Well, I think COVID played a lot in last year's success.
Yeah, I think so. Right. Because at that point there wasn't really, the vaccine was kind of out, but it really wasn't much of a thing. And at that point we didn't know. It could have been another year of being inside.
Yeah, people are a little stir crazy, and this was probably, something enjoyable in a sea of just of the mire of just, well, I don't say despair, but it was just such a slog that everybody was going
Yeah.
through. I think that definitely fed it. I know I didn't go like crazy, but it's just afterwards I'm like, what was I thinking? It's
Yeah.
like,
There was a lot
yeah,
of cool zines last year, though. There's a lot of great ones this year. That's the thing. And I don't know. I feel like the thing about Zine Quest was it would bring in a ton of people who weren't necessarily zine scene insiders. They weren't necessarily on the zine Facebook group or on Twitter or
yeah,
whatever. Like they were just getting pulled in because they were adjacent. I don't know if that's happening as much this year because of all the various things going on. And I don't want to paint that I'm not trying to paint Zemo in a negative way because I think it's fantastic. I think it's wonderful that a grassroots movement has come up and it's focused on empowering people in a way that ZineQuest never was. Like ZineQuest was like, yeah, anyone can do it. Here's the standards, but good luck. Whereas Zemo is like they're having workshops and guides are
yeah.
being put up and all this stuff has made it way more accessible. That's beautiful to me. I think that's been so good. And I think a lot of, if Zemo keeps going, and I think it will, and I hope it does, I think a lot of really amazing people are going to come into this scene that wouldn't have otherwise because they're making it way more accessible.
Yeah, it was what I found difficult was I first got on. I think there's a wave of us that came in, and there's some people are like, wait a minute, you guys are like, what are you doing? like kind of we're kind of like colonialists going in and just like and I don't know how far that went, but the other thing is I just didn't have the bandwidth to actually properly go through what was going on with Zemo this month. So
So I mean, like going into the Discord or
yeah,
what?
I mean, I just didn't.
Okay.
There was no bandwidth. I ran completely. It was with my mom and stepdad. I was,
Yeah, that's fair.
it was crazy. Well, it really was just work, going to
Yeah.
the nursing home, coming back home, and either just going to bed early or watching something going to bed. So I
Mhm.
completely kind of, I don't say unplugged, but it was just too much. So, but I think being Discord, I think Discord does have a healthy community, but there's a lot of people that don't like Discord. And I find it can be very chaotic, and I have a hard time sometimes
Yeah, I'm
dealing
not
with
a
that.
huge Discord person, which is ironic because I always push our Discord. But yeah, with the big Discords, I've even backed away from the OSE Discord, not intentionally, I think subconsciously, because that's grown so tremendously, which is great. But back when I got on it, it was much smaller, and I felt like I knew everybody. And now I hop in, and I don't know anybody. I mean, I recognize like three people, but it's just very different. And the other thing with Discord, especially with something that's like a subject Discord, is, and this is true of all things, but you start to see the same conversations crop up over and over again. And like, I just don't want to talk about ascending versus descending AC anymore. Like, I cared about that like 3 years ago, and I'm sure that other people like you stopped caring about it 20 years ago. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
right.
for everyone, these are older or newer conversations. But and I encourage people coming in and playing old school games for the first time to have those conversations. I just am not interested in them anymore.
Yeah, I'm on a comment on Facebook. There's a group called Comic Book Swipes.
Yeah,
Are you on that?
no,
Oh, it's great. So what they'll do is people are swiping or doing homages all the time, but still the same stuff every so many months.
yeah,
Like people are publishing like it's the first time. but it gets cycles through every few months.
Yep.
There's a, you know, whatever it may be, whether it could even be not just comic books, it could just be George Lucas's scenes swiping from Valerian,
Okay.
you know, stuff like that. Just
Yeah.
like, yeah, he
I'll have
ripped
to
off
check
scene
it
from
out.
scene on a lot of that stuff. It's just kind of crazy, but
That's like, it sounds very much up my alley. So I'll have to check it
comic book
out.
swipes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's good. I'll send you a link, but occasionally
Yeah.
they'll get a little crazy. But it's just kind of fun just to see how much people used other people's work,
Mhm.
and sometimes some are just homages, but you know, it's certain poses also you'll see like I think there's a one where it's Superman holding Supergirl and she's dying and he's crying. And then and it's almost like a Pieta kind of thing, but then they'll show all the comic book covers that are just homages of that same, you know, that same thing. It's kind of
Right.
cute.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess OSC, I'll take this as a bridge, because you're going to illuminate me. So
Yeah, we're gonna sort this out tonight, Jeff.
okay,
Yeah,
because this
I will concede that it is confusing. It is so confusing that there is a graphic on the Necrotic Gnome website that attempts to, at least it used to be there. It used to show you.
there is a graphic, but it still doesn't fit what I've got.
Okay, so all right, so there's
So
two
before you go any
lines.
further,
Right, go ahead.
I'm just going to describe everybody. So I've got an old school essentials, classic fantasy,
Mhm.
and I'm for the people at home that's got the video. It's the rules tome, and it shows the wizard
Yeah.
with a little imp on his shoulder, and he's looking to a crystal ball, and
Okay.
that's the book called the rules tome.
Okay.
Okay, now I want to
So-
buy what goes with this. Okay,
All right. So I will say this first off the bat, to add to the fun, Gavin changes the picture every time he does a print run.
yeah, that's great. You're making my argument. Like, what was he thinking?
I don't know. I mean, people love it. Like, you know, people got to get, I'm going to get the Errol Otis rules tome when it comes out. Like, are you kidding me? Of course.
Right.
But I'm also a little invested. So, yeah. Okay. So you only need that. That's all you need to play. That's
Well,
it.
I don't. Yeah, I know. This has got like I've been using this without a problem. I might say using it. Yeah, but what I want is if I want the other stuff, because I know there's stuff where they break things down in multiple tomes. There's more
Okay.
classes, whatever. So what would I
There's-
do to supplement this?
There's two. We have to like kind of go up to the top level and look down, and this is why it's confusing, right? And from a branding perspective, I get it. This is an important conversation to have, I think, too, if you want to do this kind of stuff. So from the top down, I think, okay, why don't we look at it from a historical perspective?
Okay,
Maybe
that
makes
sounds
more
good.
sense. Okay, so originally it was BX Essentials, and it came out as modular books. The whole point was that it was reformatted BX modular, so that you would have a class book, a spell book, a monster book, an item book, and a core book. That was the product line. The idea is if you're playing around the table, the referee would have the monster book and the item book, and the players would pass around the spell book and the class book, because you never really needed all of it at once,
Yeah,
right? So one box set would cover a table. It's a great idea, I think. What happened was people inevitably said, can you do an omnibus? So he did. And it got and the whole thing at the same time got renamed Old School Central. So at that point, there was two products that were exactly the same thing, just different formats. One's the modular books and
Yeah.
one's the tome. They're identical content. It's just different ways of presenting it. At the same time that it became Old School Essentials, he started to put out the second line, which is Advanced Fantasy, which is taking, it's not a one-to-one conversion, but it's taking stuff from AD&D 1E and bringing it into OSC. So when I got in, it was much easier because there was not a full Advanced Fantasy line. There was just BX OSE, and then there was an advanced class book and an advanced spell book. Now there's a full advanced line with full advanced tomes. So now someone coming in has to look at 3 different tomes two of them named advanced, one of them named classic, and they have to decide what is it that they need. The simple answer is, and I don't know that if this is presented right or not, or if it's even my place to say if it is or not. But the simple answer is, I think, and I've always advocated, it's just classic fantasy. That's the classic fantasy tome is the product. I think it should be pushed at all times, right? Because that's the full game,
Right.
in a book. The advanced stuff is great, but I think it does make it confusing. And then I think modular, they're going to do a new modular book set, but I also heard Gavin in the past say that modular was probably going to go away because it's less popular. So I don't know what's going on, but did that help at all? Or did I just tell you stuff you already knew?
Well, I've still got the rules tome, but what
Yeah.
goes with the rules tome?
If you want to do more stuff, you would get advanced fantasy stuff.
So all the advanced fantasy. So it doesn't matter which. So anything that's not in here is going to be, I'm going to need the advanced.
Yeah, because the modular classic fantasy is identical to the tome.
Okay.
Is exact same content. So there's no other classic. And so classic fantasy is pure BX. It's identical to BX. Everything beyond classic fantasy is Necrotic Gnome original effect. So it's like the AD&D stuff isn't truly AD&D. It's an interpretation of those ideas.
Okay.
But if you wanted to supplement, you probably wouldn't get the tomes because you already have a chunk of that content. You'd probably get the modular advanced books. So you'd get the modular class book, the modular advanced spell book, the modular monster book, and the modular item.
I think they have them combined into a tome.
They do, but the tomes that they provide are the player tome and the referee tome, and those both contain content from the classic fantasy tome.
Oh, that is confusing.
Right. So because with all the advanced content and all the classic fantasy content combined, it's twice the size. It's split into player facing content and referee facing content. The consequence of that is that the classic BX classes are in the advanced fantasy book because it's an all-encompassing tome. It's like if you play advanced fantasy, you don't also play classic fantasy, right? You're essentially going to be choosing whether you're going to play BX or AD&D, quote unquote.
Yeah, and that maybe is where the issue is, because I'm looking at this as I'm probably not going to play the advanced. I'm just looking for how they implement rules and how they implement stuff and do stuff. That's all I care about.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be running, probably not, but maybe I will.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, okay. So that helps. That helps. So
Yeah.
I think I'll go back to my statement. So I think the newer books, you shouldn't have called tomes. You should have called them something else.
Right. I get that point of view because I think the confusion started when the advanced fantasy tomes came out. Right. Because I think before that, it was the main line was classic fantasy and advanced stuff was a supplement that you would add on. That's no longer the case with the tomes because the tomes replace classic fantasy because they're all encompassing.
Okay.
That
makes
I don't
sense. Yeah, it was just so maddening. But I guess, I mean, part of it also comes, like I say, you've had the history and I've got the it's kind of dumb, but the idea is I want to write stuff for it, but I've not played it. So there's that too.
I'm not so hung up on that the way some people are. But I think you've played games, Jeff. It's not like it's not like you don't understand the concepts. And I think you've played versions of D&D, right? Have you played any pre-3E D&D?
Oh yeah. I mean, pretty much I play I get confused with all the terms. So whatever the blue book with the dragon, the Earl Otis that came in a box with the Keep on the Borderlands.
That's OSE. That's
yeah.
BX. So
that's how I started. And then I went to AD&D. No, as far as that goes, yeah, but I know they got their own little peculiarities. That's the other thing I got to make sure is that I follow whatever it is, the sensibilities are without going too far.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing is I mean, you've got the book, but also when I write, I find the SRD to be really invaluable. In fact, I probably spend 90% of my time with the SRD up and not the book, because they just search it. I want an ant, search an ant, and I look it up, you know. I
Yeah,
want
and
to
I
look
do
up
the same
monster
thing.
tables, I search monster table and I get it up.
In fact, that's where I'm at right now. I don't know that I really need the others, but just the idea is if I ever wanted to, what would I get? Right now, I think the plan is for me for Journey to the Madlands is all the creatures are going to be OSE.
Mhm.
So
I think where the other stuff might come in, and I don't think you need it, but it could help inform you. It could help you glimpse into Gavin's philosophies, because the other stuff is Gavin making decisions about what BX is, as opposed to OSC, which is just BX. That's it.
right.
Whereas the advanced stuff and the other necrotic gnome products are either interpretations of other content or original content. So you're seeing kind of, and I don't think you're in any obligation to try and ape Gavin's philosophies, you know. But if you were interested in it, I think that's where it would come in handy, because you would look at, okay, this is his thoughts on, you know, a higher level monster or more spells or whatever, and it could inform your decisions.
And that's
But
kind of
again,
where I'm at. Because I mean, like right now for Thane, I've the spells, it's still really not fully like
mhm,
it's very verbose, the stuff I've got. So that's not a big deal. But I've changed the formatting. But for the bestiary, I'm definitely going with some weird creatures.
mhm,
And for those, I think having other examples, you know, I
mhm.
definitely would work out nice or be helpful. But for the Journey to Madlands, the SRD is actually perfect. I really don't necessarily need much more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the things where like other content can be really helpful, because pure BX can be pretty bland sometimes. Like when you're looking through all those monsters and a quarter of them are entirely interchangeable, it's not very helpful as a new designer to you know, how do I make my monster stand out when like 4 of these monsters just have different names, but they're not really different, right?
Right.
Um,
Orc and Hobgoblin, you
yeah,
know, it's just like,
exactly.
right.
But a lot of people have done a tremendous amount of stuff with BX by just stepping it out a little bit more, you know, and adding a little bit more to it. Because it really only takes a little bit of flavor text and one unique mechanic to make a monster. That's, I think, all it is.
And my understanding may be completely wrong because I'm going by memory, but it does seem like it's to me, it feels like that the some of the cool little powers or abilities found in BX, I don't remember those being in other bestiaries before. And it seems like they do a lot of they make sure every, I mean, not every, well, maybe it is true. Maybe every creature has something that they do that's kind of fun.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at OD&D, but I remember the last time I looked at it thinking that there was even less than BX.
Yeah. There's not much.
So yeah, I don't think there is, because back then it was like, you got to figure it was essentially Gary Gygax's notes, right? And he didn't need to know how he was going to run a goblin. He knew how he was going to run a
Right.
goblin. And I think he kind of expected informed referees coming from a similar background to him, not realizing that the game was going to be a zeitgeist and that there was going to be all kinds of different people coming in that didn't know how to create memorable experiences that didn't rely on mechanics. You know what I mean? Because really,
Right.
old school D&D is very little mechanics, both for classes and monsters. Some people find that liberating, and some people find that like a real hang up. But I think if you're gonna sell somebody a monster, you gotta give them something. It can't just be goblin, you know.
Right, exactly. And that's where I can't already said this before. It just seems like with all those goblinoids are just such small incremental changes
Yeah.
that it's just like I don't understand what the point was. I think they're doing a better well, I say better job. I was gonna say I think fifth edition maybe does a I don't know, I shouldn't speak. It does seem like later on they try and make cultural differences between them.
Oh, for sure. I mean, by the time fifth edition comes around, the three goblins are very different. But I don't know how much that plays out mechanically, or if it's just presentation, you know, art and flavor text. Because really, what's the difference? Like one has like what pack tactics, and the other one hits harder. Like
Oh, yeah,
mechanics,
it's hard to make
depending on the
right.
system, mechanics are only going to get you so far unless they have something really interesting. Um, but most monsters don't have something really interesting.
I think the stuff was implied in the other ones because you could say, you know, for every so many goblins, there would be a percentage chance there could be, you know, a hobgoblin or there could be
Yeah,
whatever. I mean, so there was sort of an implicit in the
yeah.
design, but they never ever described really what that really meant.
Well, that's OD&D in a nutshell.
Yeah, exactly.
half thoughts putting down on a page. But I think that's the beautiful thing about it, because like if you're willing to embrace that there's, you know, Luke Gehring has been talking a lot about like the interesting things that come from seemingly mundane aspects of OD&D, like how if you follow encounter distance, surprise, and reaction for every encounter, that can create memorable encounters. And it sounds like it wouldn't, right? Because they're so procedural. But okay, there is this big massive thing, and you just kind of see it off in the distance. That already has informed the encounter. Now it's random, right? Because you rolled for it, but that is interesting. And maybe that's more interesting than a pre-scripted encounter, because
I think
it leaves,
where they failed, and I think failed hard, is they removed the reaction table.
yeah,
That's
absolutely.
where you
I
add
think the
that to
reaction
it,
table was introduced in BX.
right?
But yeah, I think it's so brilliant. And I like the step further even, and I don't know if this is original to Troika or if it's original to Advanced Fighting Fantasy, but Troika has the mine, or however it's pronounced, where each creature essentially has its own reaction table, which I love. So that goblins have their own reaction table and dragons have their own reaction table. I
Oh,
think
that makes sense.
it's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, they can do that with that system because there's so much less rules. There's way less stats than D&D. So it's fine. Like half the page can be a reaction table. But yeah, I think reaction tables are huge.
But I think when you add the reaction table to the surprise
Mhm.
and to the distance,
Yeah.
that's where the combination actually really shines.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because you know what, those hobgoblins, they may just want to trade.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, and I think a lot has been lost in a lot of ways. A lot's been gained and a lot's been lost. And I think I was talking about this, I think with Logar briefly, that I think that it's a shame that the classic dungeon game has to an extent been lost. Like it's
Yeah.
still there, but like the original game was a dungeon game. Like that was the point, was you went down into a dungeon and you got gold. And that was a game in itself, right? And it's now become much more than that. But in the process, that original game has been softened, you know. It's less gamey now and it's more open and interpretive, which can be good. But also there's something about that original game that I think is interesting, in the way that board games can be interesting.
Right, because it's an experience.
Mhm.
It's not right. It is right. And I agree if that's experience that people are wanting, and that is right. It is a different experience than the other ways of playing.
Yeah.
And you're right, it is a valid and it's a certain kind of feel, and there's a certain amount of fun to it.
Mhm.
You know, and I think, you know, and you're right, because there's kind of a point where, you know, we can talk about reality, we can talk about logic, but
Yeah.
sometimes you just want to play a game.
Mhm.
It's like,
And I think that first generation understood that in a lot of ways. Like I think that first generation was designing scenario games that were less generic. You know, D&D has become the generic fantasy game, but it wasn't a generic game when it first came out. It was a specific game. Boot Hill was a specific game, and Metamorphosis Alpha were specific games. They weren't designed to be all-encompassing games. They were a scenario that you would play. But problem is they had so much fun playing D&D that they kept expanding and making it more than the original game, which is great. But I think there's something to be said for a focused game. And that's what you see a lot now in the indie scene with zines, is like a zine game will come out and it's a game in itself, and it's a very focused thing. I think that can be really interesting.
Yeah, I think obviously, and they were doing this, I think the part of the issue too, I think the downfall of the earlier modules is that, you know, they were written, and a lot of them were written intended to be tournament play.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't written for like at the table kind of play. And I don't know that Gary, maybe he never saw the difference. Maybe to him every game is a term. I don't know. I can't say, but it's just like, that's where I think the failing is a lot of times it's just like, this just seems weird. You know, we played them.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where like you would hear people say like, oh, actually Tomb of Horrors is terrible. It's like, I guess if like you're treating it like a normal module,
right?
Of course it is. But if you treat it as what is now called a funnel or like a meat grinder, and it's a very specific thing with expectations that are set, then it's perfectly fun. You just can't go in and drop it in the middle of a campaign and expect to have a fun session.
Right, because that was never the intent of it.
Right, exactly. It was never meant that way.
It was to see who could get the farthest, and then they would at the end of the convention, they would get the prize.
Exactly. And I think that's a valid and fun way of playing the game. I think it's interesting too. But yeah, I definitely don't. I think early on, in terms of that stuff, nobody knew what to do, right? Like early on, they just assumed that nobody would buy anything but OD&D. And then they kept coming out with stuff and people kept buying it, you know, and then it became clear that adventures could have a lot of profit in them.
So with the interview with Logar, were you the one that said you played with I can't remember who said this, because one of you said that you found a first edition guy. Was it you?
Yeah.
But you never went through a dungeon.
We did one dungeon. It was a straight line.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know that I don't know if I'm a fan of dungeons or not. I think I don't play a lot of D&D anymore style games. I don't know why. I don't know why I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the answer is. And I don't know if it's because I think the problem I've had is I think most of even though people love them, I think most of those TSR games modules, I just fundamentally just don't really like, especially when they get too wackadoodle or there's too many gotchas. You know, it's like the Gary Gygax, like this door, the way you find it, it's actually been plastered over. You know, it's like nobody's gonna you're having people chip plaster, scraping walls the entire way. Is that what you're expecting? It's like, I think that kind of weirdness turned me off. And I think if they were a little, and I think what happened is later on when I wasn't playing them, I think they probably did a better job with some of the dungeons as far as not make them as much a gotcha and make them maybe more of an experience, like maybe second edition, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't played a lot of classic modules, to be honest, but I've always heard from people that the BX modules are actually way better than the AD&D modules. Like, yeah, because I think they had more freedom. They weren't necessarily under Gary's thumb at that point because he was shepherding the flagship line, even though he wrote Keep on the Borderlands, but still, like, I think, you know, like a lot of the Cook and Moldvay stuff, to my understanding, is really good. So, but I don't know. I mean, a lot of people telling me that played it in the 70s and 80s, so it could be nostalgia too. I don't really know. People still play Keeper of the Borderlands a lot, and that's a Gary dungeon. It still gets played a lot to this day.
Well, I think it's a good example. I think the only problem with it is that all the caves are too close together, which you can fix.
Yeah.
If you spread those
That's
out,
fixable. Yeah.
yeah, they're fun. I mean,
Yeah.
there's something interesting with each one. Like there's one where there's, I think, these, I don't know if it's kobolds, and their lair's right next to an ogre.
Yeah.
And they have a bag of gold. And if certain situations arise, they find out you're attacking them. Somebody will run with that bag of gold, throw it at the ogre, and he'll go fight for them.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of cool. You know what I mean?
No, I think Gary's stuff is very, whatever you think about the man, I'm hesitant to throw as Gygaxian and troublesome the actual game content can be. I'm hesitant to throw the game content out with the problematic game content, not socially speaking, but mechanically speaking.
Oh,
like,
right.
I whatever you think about his views on biology, whatever, like there's separate discussions to be had about whether the game is good at all. And some of that, like I know his taste, but some of that's like, okay, yeah, is AD&D too much? I think so. Is it convoluted? I think so. But there's still interesting things going on in the game, in OD&D, and in some of the modules that Gary wrote. Like I think that those classic series that he wrote are maybe not necessarily perfect for running by today's standards, but are certainly interesting and introduced a lot of concepts that stay with us to this day. Like people are still doing Underdark Drow stuff, you know.
I think if the internet was to get nuked,
right,
and it just ceased to exist, I think the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide is probably the best of any RPG material ever put out. I mean, as far as you could sit and pull something open and read something interesting. You could read about diseases,
right.
You could read about gemstones, you could read about hiring woodworkers for your castle. Right. I mean,
it's definitely I think it's a very fun book. I think the problem that people get is they go into it looking at it with today's standards, where they expect it to be a literal Dungeon Master's Guide, and it's, other than like character creation rules, I don't think there's anything else. And I haven't read that entire book cover to cover, so I might be entirely wrong. But my interpretation is, other than the character creation rules, which are for some reason in the Dungeon Master's Guide, I don't think there's anything else you need in that book to play the game. And that's very interesting, right? Because nowadays, and this has changed a little bit with 5th edition, like people argue about whether the fifth edition, I've gotten in arguments about whether the fifth edition book is a true core book, because I don't think there's anything in there that you actually need to play the game.
Oh, for the Dungeon Master, no, you don't need it at all.
But I think in between sessions, in between editions, like 2 through 3rd and maybe 4th, you did need the DMG to some extent, and it was expected that it would guide you literally as a dungeon master. Whereas 1st edition, that's not the purpose of it. It's literally just almost everything left over in Gary's brain from the first 2 books that doesn't fit in anywhere else. But it's very, as you said, it's very interesting, and there's some golden things in there.
I think the problem too is, for you young kids, you whippersnappers, when you're 12 years old and there is nothing on TV, there is no internet, you can get with a piece of graph paper and you can draw out a castle and calculate its costs, and blow a whole afternoon getting lost in that kind of activity.
There's definitely, everything has changed in that regard though, because people just don't have, even young kids nowadays don't have the kind of time that existed. Like I am old enough to remember, believe it or not, Jeff, analog days. And I remember being bored. And I remember the type of immersion I could give to a subject. Like I could only get into 3rd edition when I was like 12 to 16. That was the only time in my life where I
Right.
was ever going to get so into something that I was going to learn the rules or something like that. Now I don't have the time or the bandwidth for it.
I agree.
And I don't know that young people do to the same extent either, because they now have access to tremendous amounts of information and entertainment. That there's a serious divide, culturally between people who were born before the internet, and people who were born after the internet. And it's entirely different world, entirely different. And I think that has bled into RPGs. Nature of RPGs are different, and people aren't going to sit down and learn something like AD&D 1E by heart and go all in and spend every day playing, the way that kids would in the 70s and 80s, and play it during lunch and go home and play it for 7 hours. It doesn't exist anymore. That world is gone, for better or worse. I don't know. It's not my place to say whether that's good or bad, but AD&D, the Gygax era, that was definitely of its time for sure. And I find it interesting, just from I don't want to say nostalgic or almost like a romantic point of view. Like I find the 70s era of RPGs really very fascinating to me. Probably because I wasn't there.
I think what's kind of sad, well, I'm not sad, but so I don't think my experience I think most of my experience was really turning into the 80s mostly.
Mhm.
And there is a lot of, I guess there's Traveler, there's D&D, there's Tecumel, there was, Villains and Vigilantes was a thing at the time.
Mhm.
But there was also some other people doing some odd, weird, I think on the California, the coast, I think their D&D started looking more like weird science and less of medieval
Yeah.
fantasy. So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff I kind of missed out on.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. Like, I think even though 80s, very early 80s was kind of like the peak D&D, it's very different than 70s D&D. I think if you played in the mid 70s, you were having a very different experience, I think, because it was less set in stone.
Right. The
There was
codification.
less authorial authority. Like if you played before Gygax wrote AD&D, there was no like, this is the correct D&D. That was very much an effort for, I think, Gygax to reconsolidate after he had gotten out there and he started to see people making versions of it he didn't actually like. So by the time you would have played, that attempt to create authority would have already happened.
Well, but I think all the games started increasing in complexity.
Yeah.
Like Space Opera, completely complicated game. I think Boot Hill, fairly complicated. I mean, they definitely, by the time those things started coming out, the roots of the earlier, simpler BX style was gone. And there was the rules were much more, becoming more complicated. Not as bad as it would be, I think, in the 90s, where it just went out of control.
It almost became like, to my understanding, and again, I was pretty young at the time, but it was almost like an arms race, where like the bigger and crunchier the book was, the more valuable it was. And it took something like the crash and a philosophical reset to swing the pendulum back the other direction, right? Because like you had like Palladium and all these other things that were, I'm not knocking them, but I don't think they would survive now as new products.
No, I mean, and I think even stuff like, I mentioned before, like Moral Project, it's just like, this is insane. Like I this is insane. Like
Right.
You have to be really into guns, really to be figuring and calculating shock. And it just,
Well, I think that's right now what you're seeing. A lot of people is stripping out the fun parts of Traveler and leaving all,
oh yeah,
the space calculations in the trash bin, because there's still interesting stuff there, but nobody wants to spend 4 hours figuring out the trajectory of fire or whatever.
Well, we
Um,
we actually did in high school pull our calculators and did vectors.
Oh my God. That's true nerd. That's, I mean,
Yeah,
that's it.
but I don't have time for that now.
No,
But anyway,
there's probably a program that would do it for you, but then you're on the verge of video games at that point.
yeah, it is. I think the true, this is why I think we're really, I mean, in a renaissance is like, I've never played Twilight 2000 before,
Mhm.
but from what I heard, the mechanics are not great and it's heavy on the gun porn.
Mhm.
And it's just, and I've read through some of the adventures and they just appear to be more just excuses to have shootouts.
Sure.
So then Free League gets a hold of it, which
Yeah.
I've not played yet, but they actually just like made the rules, I think, a whole lot more approachable.
Okay.
But you still can have the gun porn, you can still have all the vehicles, you can have your claymores, but you're not getting into this insane level of detail. But it's still there is still detail there you can play it as a war game if you want. I mean, but it's not. So I think they've learned through over the years to just kind of understand how to reapply mechanics in a way that you can still give an experience of things not being overly simplistic, but yet also not overly convoluted to approach.
Yeah. Well, they're certainly the ones to possibly pull it out. Now I don't know a lot about them, but they're Mutant Year Zero, aren't they?
Yes.
So did they originally write that or did they buy it?
No.
That's an old game, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Is that what all of their stuff is based on, or is that just something else entirely?
Everything is, yeah, I would say pretty much everything is, I don't know about Symbarium, but yeah,
Right.
pretty much everything is based on a variation. Now the Twilight 2000 is probably the furthest out.
Okay.
So the system, it's still stat, skill. You combine them, you roll, sixes count successes,
Mhm.
and then generally there's a reroll, and the reroll mechanic is usually where something bad can happen.
Yeah.
So they simplified it with I don't want to say simplified it. There's less dice rolling in Twilight 2000.
Mm.
But it kind of does a lot of neat stuff. So you can kind of also figure out your firearm misfires or whatever the case may be.
It's interesting to me that like they can kind of, I don't want to say they get away with it, but the standards are different for like them in Chaosium versus Hasbro. And obviously they're different things, but it's like Free League can have a single system, right, and come out with all these different games based on it. Chaosium can have a single system, come out with all these different games on it. But if Hasbro was to just use D&D mechanics like the way they did in the 3E era to make spin off different games, people would complain about it, right? Now, obviously, I think that Hasbro's held the different standards for a good reason, but I think that's interesting to me.
Well, the thing is what is different, where I think the idea with 3.5 or 3.0 was one system to rule them all.
Yeah.
Free League, they're not everything is directly, some things you can kind of intermingle, but they definitely for what I understand, I've not played I've not played Tales from the Loop.
Okay.
But the way they do, you can't just like play a Year from the Loop character
right
and put him into Mutant Years. It just will not work. I mean, they definitely jiggered stuff.
I think that makes total sense. I just mean that like I'm almost surprised that people don't complain that they don't make a whole new system for every product. You know what I mean? Because there are a lot of people who feel that a lot of the hardcore systems matters people feel that mechanics are really informative, right?
Well, I would say that for my limited play, I think there's more compatibility with Chaosium stuff than there is with the Free League stuff. Now,
I could see that.
But there's not that much difference. but as far as like, if you look just strictly at skill,
Mhm.
the simplest mechanics, those are pretty much true throughout. But it's the way stress is handled, the way other aspects do make it pretty unique. But yeah, but the thing is still, I will say that all of them, there is still, when I say all of them, Mutant Year Zero, I would say Mutant Year Zero, Coriolis, and Alien,
Mhm.
they still all have a similar, and I'd say even Forbidden Lands, they still all kind of have the same kind of feel about them that's pretty universal, and the mechanics are different. So you're not
Right.
really getting a large change in experience.
Mhm.
But they are but there is a certain feel that, I mean, yeah, it's definitely I think if you like that one system, you like them all, and you kind of get the vibe and the thing they're going for, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And I'm not trying to knock that either. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just find it interesting.
But you're not going to
But
be playing. But see, the thing is with the systems is, the Coriolis, the Mutant Year Zero, and the Alien, they're all still kind of the same vibe. You're not playing superhero crazy stuff, and you're not playing
right,
D&D stuff either. I mean, it's usually I don't want to say realistic, but it's a little more brutal system,
right,
and there's probably some tweaks you can do, but they're not changing. It's not like you're not doing wildly different things. It's not like, it's kind of like I'd say with Powered by the Apocalypse.
okay,
They can all do different things, and they can do
right,
wildly different things, but they still have a certain feel about them.
absolutely, yeah.
I don't know how long we talked, Dan. I think it's
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a good one.
we better cut it short because I got work tomorrow. So,
Same.
well,
Yeah, it was
you're in the
definitely,
future too, so you got to
yeah,
deal with that.
yes. I still have things to do before going to sleep. So
Oh well,
yeah,
I'll let you go. We'll have to do this again.
definitely. I appreciate you bringing me on. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I've been wanting to have you on, and I was pretty excited with the whole with the planar compass, what you guys are doing. So, I mean,
Thank you.
obviously, you're a great group of people. Want to stay
Thank you.
successful. I just I'm glad I was able to get you on. Just life events were just
Yeah, well, I
going
get it.
nuts. It's like
I get it.
we all are either just got through some weird life events, are in weird life events, or will be going into some weird life events. So,
Yes, definitely.
okay, well, you take care, Dan, and
All right, you
I'll talk
too.
to you later.
All right. Bye.